Hello, hello, hello. Aurelia Davis, the educator's educator, coming to you on a Thursday afternoon in May. Hello, how is everybody doing? How's everybody doing? Hope everybody is well. Hope everybody is doing well. And there's some successes in your life going on at this time. I just hope those things are happening for you. Uh, Belated happy Mother's Day for all the mothers. That Mother's Day took place on this last Sunday, and just hope that everybody had a great time with their children and teachers, whether you have children or not, your own children, you basically consider to be a mother too. You play motherhood 5 days a week, 5 days a week, at least 2 to 3, 4 to 6 hours per day. So give yourself some credit for that also. Just coming to you, and this is interesting how this is. Well, let me go back a little bit. Just congratulations on Mayor Brandon Johnson being the new mayor of Chicago. He, to me, I haven't met him personally, but just seems to be the right person for the job. Let me just put it that way: the right person for the job. Very personable, basically in the trenches, going into the neighborhoods and just seeing exactly what the neighborhoods need, especially schools. And that for that we are appreciating him. He's starting on out on the right foot, and we just can hope to give him continued success as things go on. But it's interesting because with the new mayor coming in, and also the I think we have like about maybe 2 more years or a year for the moratorium of school closings. And I say that to say this, that um, back in I'm looking on my notes and whatever, say for instance, I would say like in the like around 2012, 2013. And let me see if I can find a little bit more information. Okay, well, in the middle 20s, there was a big a big group of schools that were closed. And those particular schools were closed because of underutilization, meaning that there were not enough children in the buildings in order to manage, not to manage, but basically to uh, state the funds that was being poured into the building. It was not enough children in order for the funds to be poured into that particular building. And So the underutilization of these buildings was basically in a bad situation, very bad situation. A lot of schools were in that situation. In other words, so basically CPS has been losing students for the last, I'll say, last 15 years. And then because of selective enrollment and so on and so forth, a lot of schools in the neighborhoods were losing students to children going outside of the neighborhood to outside neighborhoods to schools. And the unfortunate thing is that this was basically happening on the west and south sides, the west and south sides of Chicago. Unfortunately, it was happening on the west and south sides of Chicago. It was happening in my particular neighborhood where I grew up, which was North Lawndale, and then you had neighborhoods like Inglewood and Bronzeville and so on and so forth. So as the neighborhoods were being I would say, there was a disinvestment. I think I said the word right. In other words, the city was not investing back into these particular neighborhoods. They were not investing back into these particular neighborhoods. And because they were not investing back into the neighborhoods, a lot of the schools were falling short as far as the funding that they would get in order to keep their buildings up to a level of performance as far as performance is concerned. So you turn around, and a lot of schools, there were turnaround schools, SUASUL schools, and then there were a lot of charter schools. And basically, these particular schools were coming up in those particular neighborhoods, the west and the south sides, which was not good at all. So what has happened is that I can bring up maybe one or two reasons why. And at the time when schools were being evaluated, there was a system called SQRP. I think I pronounced it right. But anyway, it was a school evaluation that came down through the city. It came down through the state. And at the same time, schools were being evaluated by the number of students, they had in the building by the sometimes looking at the neighborhood around the building as to how readily the neighborhood fed into the school or helped support the schools. It was also the issue of I would say the scores, the scores that basically came out and basically were at the ending result as to why a lot of schools were being taken over. And mostly these schools were on the west and south sides. And they lost a lot. They lost a lot. The majority of those schools that were closed were on the west and south sides. So when we're looking at things today, here we are in 2023. You're talking about something that happened in like in 2012, 2013, around in that area under a particular mayor. I'm not going to mention his name. And at that particular time, there was just the type of situation where children were not being, the schools that children were going to were not being, being taken care of in the right type of manner. So there may have been the issue of parental involvement. There have been a shortage of teachers in the building, and definitely a shortage of needed resources. Definitely a shortage of needed resources that were needed in those schools in order for those schools to thrive. And then, like I said before, the utilization of the particular building. There were buildings on the west side that housed as many as 600 to 700 to 1,000 students. And coming into the middle 20s, you looked around and these particular buildings were only had like maybe 200 to 300 students. So as CPS started to look at these particular buildings that were basically empty, they asked the question, why should we continue to sink funds, to put funds in these buildings where there are no students? And that was one good reason why they decided to close a lot of the buildings. They decided to close a lot of the buildings. But the fight back was this: how can we teach the few children that we still have, or how can we get back the children that we lost if CPS is not giving us the resources that we need in order to run these schools? If we're not being given the resources that we need in order to run these schools. So the battle was back and forth, the neighborhood, the school, and Chicago Public Schools and CPS and the battle. But in the long run, and what it finally happened is that the neighborhood schools lost. The neighborhood schools lost. Well, after so many years, and here we are in 2023, we're starting to look at the whole investment as far as schools are concerned in Chicago. And they have, within, I would say, within the last year and a half, there has been a process in place to take away the old evaluation and to put in a new evaluation of schools, especially after the pandemic. They gave educators and it gave the administrators that were in charge and a different look. They decided they needed to look at schools differently now. Neighborhood schools, selective enrollment schools, they had to look at them differently now to see if they were meeting the needs of the students that were going to these schools. They had to realize that all children were not going to be able to get into selective enrollment schools. They had to realize that all children were not going to be able to get into magnet schools. So it only left you with one thing to do: fix the schools where the children are. Make that school where that child is attending the best school that he can get in his particular neighborhood. Make it a good school. Pour in the resources that are needed in order for this school to be just as good as a school on maybe another side of town. And the main goal also was to pull children back into the neighborhoods where they lived. They decided that, and parents complained that it didn't make sense. So how come my neighborhood does not have a good quality school for my child to attend? Why do I have to get up at about 6 o'clock in the morning in order to take my child around, across town to a school when there's a school right around the corner? And these complaints had to be listened to. So for the last year and a half, and I worked on this committee myself, there came a movement to change how schools were going to be evaluated. And we worked hard at it. And so far is still, from what I'm understanding, it was accepted by the elected board, the Board of Education. But it's going to take time to put this actual plan in place. Some of the issues that was brought up about school closures and why schools were closed is because the underutilization, and that children were leaving their schools in their neighborhoods going to schools across town. The funding that was not poured back into particular buildings in poor neighborhoods, because that's when it finally came down to, these were poor neighborhoods with poor economic conditions. And how come money was not being fed? So if you're looking at a neighborhood that might be in dire strait as far as funding is concerned, you may look at the individuals that live in the neighborhood. You may look at the children that attend the school in the neighborhood. It might not be the best picture. It may not be the best picture, but why make them suffer because they do not have the funding, and compare their school to a school that's on the north side or another part of town where funding is complete and where poverty is not an issue. I'm just going to be honest, where poverty is not an issue. And so what we did fight for tremendously was basically to look at schools individually, to look at every school individually. And then before you even look at that school, see why that some of these schools were closed in the first place. And for the reasons why these schools were closed, because they housed 600 students and they only had 150. Of course, that's underutilization, but what can you do to put more funding into the school to bring those students back that left? What can you do to put more funding in the schools to bring those children back that left in the first place? They had to leave in the first place. They had to leave for a reason. There had to be a reason why they left. So if they left, what did you do as a district, or what did you do as the city to keep these particular schools open? And we found that there was a lot of faces that didn't have answers. There were a lot of questions that did not have answers to them. So these things have basically been built into a new evaluation system that's going to be taking place, I say, within the next year or so. And it's a good evaluation because now what's going to happen is that all schools are going to be looked at individually. They're going to look at exactly where the school sits, what type of neighborhood, how economically sound the neighborhood might be, what type of children attend this school, what kind of resources does this school need in order for it to be one of the top schools in the city. And those evaluations are going to be taking place, and those evaluations and those investigations, I'll call it, is going to take place long before a school is evaluated, which is good. Which is good. So, in other words, you're looking at a school, you're looking at Brown School. Brown School is sitting in a very poor neighborhood, and the enrollment can be as high as 500, but right now they're only sitting with 150 children. Okay. You would say that basically within the neighborhood where Brown School is located, the students are basically going out of the neighborhood to another school in another district because they have gotten the results of scores and how things are taking place in Brown School. And the parents have the choice not to send their child to that particular school, even though it might be across the street. So the parents are invested in this as to them wanting their child to go to a very good, to a quality school. And if it's a quality public school, all public schools should be measured on the same, or should have the same resources. They should have the same resources, whether they're in a rich neighborhood or whether they're in a poor neighborhood, whether they're in a white neighborhood or whether they're in a Hispanic neighborhood or whether they're in a black neighborhood. All public schools should have the same resources. Unfortunately, some schools may need additional resources because of the issues that they face in their classrooms and because of the children that might need the additional resources. And so in order to meet the child's need, in order to teach the child, you have to meet the need of the child. I'll say that again. In order to teach the child, you have to meet the need of the child. So if you're coming from a neighborhood where the children are not getting breakfast at home, then you're going to have to provide breakfast in the morning. And that might take away about 20 minutes of classroom time. But in order for those children to thrive in learning, they need to be fed. They need to be fed. So Brown School compared to the school on another side of town, this other school on the other side of town, the students are pretty well off economically. The neighborhood where the school is located is pretty is pretty economically sound. And so how can you compare that school with Brown School? You cannot. There's no comparison that will take place that will be justified as to what is going on in that particular school. So in the next coming days, so there has been a moratorium on school closings, and what that moratorium has, individuals that declared that moratorium were, it was political, and it's school administrators. And so what I'm understanding is that, and what has happened during this moratorium, first of all, we did have the pandemic, so basically nobody was in school buildings at all. But even during the pandemic, it allowed educators, it allowed administrators, it allowed politicians to relook at how we measure our schools. And we're even deciding that scores does not necessarily make a school. Standardized testing does not determine whether a school is good or not. They have come to that conclusion finally, that standardized testing does not dictate what kind of school is going on. Because just like I said before, if you have students that are not even academically sound to take a standardized test in order to score high, then there is not the school's fault, because the child came in with say for instance, supposed to be in third grade, but he's only reading at the first grade level. You're going to have to build up to where you meet him where he is and build up to where you want him to go. And that does not take place in 2 to 3 months. Sometimes it has to take place or be delved into at least 2 to 3, at least 2 to 3 months, or maybe a whole school year. So how are you going to hold a school responsible for the majority of the children that came in under that could not read at grade level, or couldn't do math at grade level? And then you're going to punish the schools because they didn't show immediately where these children were going to be, or put them at grade level within the time that you can't do that. You can't do that. And they're finding that this is not it's not balanced, it's not fair. And so what it comes down to is that we, as administrators and educators, had to come to the point we had to meet the school where the school was. In other words, wherever the school was at that particular time, that's where we had to meet the school. And within meeting that school, we had to decide what resources were needed. We had to look at the school climate. We had to look at the neighborhood where the school sat. We had to look at the students that attended the school. We had to look at the needs and resources of the parents and what the parents might need in order for them to help their child be successful in school. All of these things were needed. And so that's why we do believe that the 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 coming soon of school closures is going to be something that's going to be almost non-existing, for the simple reason that we have to decide to evaluate schools. They have come to the decision that schools have to be evaluated differently. Every school has to be evaluated differently, even though the final rubric will be the same. But to get the rubric is up here and the school is down here, you have to get the school up to meet the rubric. And that's only fair. You have to bring the school up to meet the rubric, not decide that because the school is at the bottom, they're not going to meet the rubric, because they probably will not. Oh, wow, I said a lot. But this is an ongoing debate that's going to possibly be going on for quite a while, because it is serious. And when it finally comes down to it, neighborhoods are looking at the schools in their areas, and they want to know, how come I have to send my child across town to go to a school when there's a school right across the street? How come the school across the street do not have the same resources as the school across town? And that's some question that we as leaders, we have to look at. Politicians have to look at it too. And it will be happening soon because they're talking about an elected school board. And an elected school board will mean that the people that have children in these buildings will be able to elect who they want to represent their children, who they want to represent their schools. And that's going to be very, very powerful. This is Aurelia Davis, the educator's educator. Oh, wow. I came up with a lot of information today. Hopefully you were able to get some of the things I was saying. But just be on the lookout and see exactly what's going to be happening within the next year or so, especially about the elected school board and how schools in Chicago are going to be evaluated from this point on. This is Aurelia Davis, the educator's educator. Hoping everybody's having a great year. I've had a great year. Teachers, I love you, and keep doing what you do. Take care and have a great evening. Bye-bye.